Your grandmother planted something once in the early 50s. It wasn't a temporary thing. She picked from that same patch for decades. It was the same plant in the same spot, year after year. You probably remember seeing it as a kid. That one planting in 1952 fed a family for 50 years. It lasted until the early 2000s. But look at how you do it now. You buy new every spring. By winter, it's dead and gone. Then you spend the money again. You walk down the same aisle and pick from the same plastic tags and the same 3 choices. You've felt that gap. You already know it wasn't just your imagination. Something real ended, and you just never got the straight story on why. You've stood in stores looking at the options and felt like something was thin. Not just the food, but the whole system. It feels like food used to belong to families, but now it belongs to shelves. You're not being crazy or too romantic about the past. Scientists actually went back and measured this shift. They looked at the numbers. They compared the old crops to the modern ones. They found big drops in the bitter compounds that used to give food its character. They found drops in mineral density too. Those aren't just opinions. They were measured, logged, and saved. The USDA has records of variety counts that back this up. The breeding logs show exactly what happened. Your grandparents lived in a completely different food world. Your grandmother didn't just walk through aisles, she walked the land. Your grandfather didn't scroll through options. He chose from what grew. Back then, the fields held plants that were started once and kept for years. They had these old lines that stayed in the ground. They came back every season. They were cut back and then they came back again. Some of those fields lasted 20 years or even longer. That's documented history. People shared offshoots. They divided roots. Plants moved hand to hand from neighbor to neighbor. Your grandparents didn't have to buy those seeds every single year. They kept them. It wasn't just one plant either. It was the asparagus, the rhubarb, the berries, the figs, and the herbs. Whole parts of the dinner table came from things that stayed put. Your grandmother knew which ones would come back after a hard frost and which ones would survive the heat. She knew 40 different edible plants by sight. That wasn't some little hobby. That was food. It was survival. Seeds were saved for generations. They were free. They changed slowly to match your specific soil. They were passed down like an inheritance. But when she died, that knowledge went quiet. Nobody wrote it down. It lived in her hands. And now you carry the memory but not the practice. You've noticed the pattern in the stores today. Most people just walk past it, but you stop. You see the same 3 choices everywhere: tomato, pepper, lettuce. They have different names, but they're basically the same plants. You've noticed it, even if most people don't. Scientists compared the old catalogs to the new ones and saw the collapse. You might see 40 types of a plant in an old print catalog, but today, you only see 5 or maybe 3. You know it's not just about taste, it's about the system. So here's exactly what happened. In the 1950s, the food world still leaned local. Cities were smaller back then. Trucks were slower, and the cold chains we use today were still young. Breeders worked directly with farmers, not with giant factories. The traits they looked for were simple. They wanted plants that could survive the winter. They wanted them to come back every year. They wanted a strong taste and plants that could hold their own in the field. Perennials made sense then. They were stubborn and uneven, and they didn't all ripen at the exact same time. Your grandparents worked around that. Their system had real strength, but it also had limits. They had autonomy, but they also faced a real risk of hunger if a crop failed. You have reliability now, but you lost the choice. You can't have both. By the 1960s, the world started changing fast. Cities swelled, and the highway system spread across the country. Stores went national. This is when the breeding goals shifted. The scientists didn't wake up one day and decide to be evil. They just got a new set of problems to solve. Suddenly, food had to ship across states. It had to be able to stack in crates. It had to sit on a shelf for 14 days and still look exactly the same. Perennials don't love that kind of world. So breeders started leaning toward seeds. They wanted things to be uniform, clean, and perfectly timed. Take artichokes as the perfect story. The old types lived for decades. You planted them once and they fed your family for years, but they didn't make sense for a national catalog. They moved slow and needed hands to harvest, not machines. By the late 80s, those types started sliding out of the catalogs. The breeding logs show the pivot. Annual hybrids took over. They finished fast, 5 months, 1 cut, and then they were out. This gave growers uniform yields and predictable fields. It made shipping easy. Breeding logs from universities show this shift clearly. It's not just an opinion, it's in the records. Bitterness in plants went down because shoppers preferred it that way. Skin got thinner. The shapes got tighter. Scientists measured this data. Most people think taste just changed on its own, but you know the selection changed. In blind taste tests run over and over, people chose the mild, sweet versions 4-to-1. Breeders followed that because the stores followed it, and the money followed the stores. Economics selected what lived. It wasn't a secret plot, it was a filter. Perennials lost because they didn't scale. The old lines lost because they didn't ship well. The bitter flavors lost because shoppers spit them out. By the 1970s, seed companies were exploding. Patents started to spread. Machines took over the fields. The fields went wide, and the human hands left. The rows got longer. Machines need sameness to work, and perennials just don't give you sameness. Then came the 1980s, and there was a boom of mergers. Seed houses started folding everywhere. The old family catalogs disappeared. Hundreds of companies became dozens, and then those dozens became 10. By the mid-90s, just 3 companies controlled most of the seed genetics in the world. That's not a rumor. Market data shows it clearly. 3 companies. Most people have no idea that happened, but you do. Most people think the choices we have are natural, but you can see how they shrank. Your grandfather chose from 40 varieties, but you only get 3. Nobody ever asked you which ones you wanted. You can't even save your own seeds easily anymore. Many of them are patented, and they don't even carry true if you try to plant them again. That line of plants your family held for generations is corporate property now. It feels like something was taken from you. It feels like it was done to you. But let's be straight about the math. The population doubled, and then it doubled again. A local system of garden plots couldn't feed that many people. Cities needed food that didn't rot in a few days. Shipping demanded tough skins. Stores demanded sameness. Your grandparents' system fed families, but it couldn't feed nations. Your system today feeds 300 million people, but it also erased the local connection. Your grandparents had closeness, but they also had risk. You have supply, but you lost the intimacy. You can't have both. Something real definitely ended. The seeds your grandmother saved, the smell of those old fields, and the way your grandfather could judge soil just by feeling it with his hands, that wasn't a small thing. You're allowed to miss that. You're allowed to feel like it ended too early. Most people never even saw that world, but you did. That's why it hits you so hard. You aren't just chasing some vague nostalgia. You are reacting to a massive system change. Scientists measured the loss of compounds. The breeding records show the goals, and the USDA kept the counts. The loss is real. Once you see why it happened, the rage starts to loosen a bit. It's not about approving of it, it's about understanding it. Scale crushed the intimacy, math beat the memory. The same system that is capable of feeding giant cities just can't hold on to a grandmother's garden. Your grandparents had control, but they had gaps in their food supply. You have total coverage, but you lost the control. You can't have both. Nothing was stolen from you in a dark room. It was traded away across decades, slowly and quietly. It was efficient. That's why it feels invisible to most people. They never connect the dots, but you just did. So when you feel that ache in the grocery store, or when you think about what your grandmother knew and what died with her, you aren't being weak, you're being accurate. Something closed. You inherited the memory, not the practice. That connection was real. Understanding why it ended doesn't erase the feeling, but it gives it a place to live. It's not a wound anymore. It's a chapter of history, and chapters can be mourned. You don't have to fight it. because now you know the when, the how, and the why. Knowing that is how you stop carrying it like a theft and start holding it like history. Your grandmother planted something once in 1952, and it came back every spring in the same spot with the same crown. It was the same plant for 50 years. It fed the house for half a century. Today, you buy new seeds every season because the system changed to favor scale over intimacy. You've felt the gap because you see the pattern. Your grandparents talked about plants like they were neighbors. They were the one that comes back, or the one your granddad liked. Seeds moved in jars and paper envelopes tucked away in drawers. That knowledge wasn't just cute. It kept the bills low and the choice local. When your grandmother died, that knowledge died with her because nobody wrote it down or recorded her voice. That connection ended in a quiet room, and most people didn't notice. But you feel it. In the 1950s, farms were local and seed companies were small. There were hundreds of them with family names and town names tied to specific places. Plants weren't bred to travel then. They were bred to live right there. They handled the local cold and the local bugs. They tasted strong, even if they didn't ship well. Then the 60s hit, and the records from universities show the shift. Shelf life, uniform size, and truck loading became the new priorities. Plants that traveled well won the day, and the plants that didn't were left behind. By the 70s, the commercialization exploded and the catalog started thinning out. Consumer taste tests guided the breeding. Sweeter beat out bitter, and uniform beat out anything strange. People picked sweetness 4-to-1 in every test. That's in the data, not just a theory. People chose what scaled. Those tests weren't rigged, they were blind, and they produced the same results every time. By the late 70s, companies started buying each other up. Seed houses merged, and then merged again until they disappeared. Hundreds became dozens, and dozens became 10. By the mid-80s, patents and corporate breeding were the norm. By the 90s, 3 companies controlled 60% of the genetics. Your grandfather chose from 40, but you get 3. He saved seeds, but you buy them every season. It wasn't malice that caused this, it was math. The population was exploding and needed food that could last for weeks on a truck. Local systems couldn't feed 335 million people. Trucks needed uniform loads, and stores needed predictable stock. Scale selected the winners. Your grandparents had depth, but they also had scarcity. You have abundance, but you also have dependence. You can't have both. You lost the range of flavor, but you gained a year-round supply. You lost the local genetics, but you gained global calories. You lost seed autonomy, but you gained survival at scale. Most people only see the shelves, but you see the trade. The anger you feel makes sense because the choice narrowed while nobody was watching. Between 1970 and 1990, 10 companies became 5, and 5 became 3. Most people don't question produce, but you do. The quiet loss of your grandmother's way of knowing plants is what really hurts. That intimacy just can't scale. It was real, but you didn't inherit the practice. You inherited the memory. That's heavy, and you're allowed to feel it. Understanding the economics softens the blow. It wasn't villains, it was volume. It wasn't stupidity, it was survival. 3 companies controlling the genetics feels wrong, but it also feeds cities that your grandparents never could have imagined. Both of those things are true at the same time. Something was lost and something was gained. You can mourn the loss without having to lie about the gain. You don't have to stay stuck between nostalgia and rage. You know when it changed, and you know why. Local autonomy simply couldn't feed global mouths. That doesn't make your loss fake. It makes it human. The ache you carry is just memory without a place to land, but now it has a place. You weren't being crazy, and you weren't being too romantic. You were noticing a very real shift. The records, the data, and the timeline are all clear. Your grandparents lived in a food world that ended, and you are the generation that watched it close. Understanding that is how the anger finally loosens. It's not about giving your approval, it's about finally having the understanding